Thank you. It's awesome to come and read some poems for you all this morning. It's great. There's a lot of you here. This is wonderful. This is very cool. So, I'm just going to go ahead and just get right into it and just show you a little bit of what I do with the Albuquerque Poetry Slam. So, this first poem, El Cuento de Juana Henrietta. There was no wind the day Juana battled the machine. Smoke rose from the stacks of the downtown tortilla factory, slow, like the wrinkled, steady hands de las viejitas. Cocineras whose fingers were callous as the spirits of their mothers, they were the assembly line of ancient faces. They worked for coins off their husbands' wages. Mothers of the New Deal labored their bones dull with the factory whistle at dawn. Harina y manteca became the skin on their palms, 50 pounds of flour each dark morning. Their grip stung, salt grains, leavening, tortillas rounded like the suffered crown of the god carved in the altar. Their god hung above the stove, rounded by rolling pins cut from cedars, smooth with hidden splinters in their hands, and dough rose before the sun. And this morning hung bitter in Juana's mouth, like the daylight that did not stretch over her tongue when she woke, when the women found machines on the factory floor where they once stood. Here are your replacements, the boss growled like rusting metal. There's no work for you here. I want you all out. And the ancient faces gazed like forgotten saints they once prayed to. Some cursed the foreman's name, their fists clenched tighter than the gears in the machines that took their jobs. But Juana didn't move. She stood steel heavy. Her wrinkles run fierce like flooding arroyos when she said, I'm faster than any machine. And the engine fired, conveyor belt rolled tamales, each an exact copy of the last. Juana took the table beside, handful of masa, corn husk hidden in her skin. She spread masa, carne y chile, each glide of her hand like wiping tears from her daughter's face. Wipe sweat with back of fist, her salt, a blessing of food at the table. She knew it didn't matter if she beat the machine. She gone like so many Mexicanas, riding like nopals beneath the tractor's heels, just as their men's backs were replaced with forklifts and backhoes. But an engine does not name its children after a passing rain cloud, does not brush dead leaves from headstones, and never learned the recipe from her grandmother's tongue. The machine fired, la hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile, bled the crevice in the hands. La hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile, wrapped the bandana of Juana's hair. La hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile, her daughter's birth cries. La hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile, her husband buried in the Philippines. La hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile, the shadow on her wedding day. La hoja, la masa, la carne, el chile became the peasant maid's machete as the engine sang the death of the laborer's breath. The foreman's eyes never left Juana's face as the machine slowed down. Smoke and motor oil snaked the air when the conveyor stopped. Juana crushed the last tamal. Her voice stung like a snake's venom in the chile when she cussed out the foreman, and her shadow stained the floor where she stood. The next day, the machines unloaded. The women manned the controls, but Juana never showed for work. Some said she joined the army, maybe opened a restaurant. Some said she became a corn plant rooted in burning soil, but really none of them knew. Still, their throats all burn from the steam. The gears grind off and rust in their dreams. Their mouths all dry when they say the name of the woman and sing legends of the day. Juana Henrietta made tamales against the machine. Thank you. Cool. Sometimes it messes with me because I forget how loud I am. I'm a high school teacher, so I talk at this volume all the time. And I'm always having to talk over so much just noise in the classroom, and then I forget, and I have regular conversations and people are just like, you don't have to yell at me, I'm right here. But I've got a few poems for you all. So this next one is, unfortunately, a true story. This one's called The Wedding Dance. Diane and Mike married in the spring. Our last great family wedding. The American Legion Dance Hall was not prepared for a guest list of 400. Catered by none other than my grandma. Music by Al Hurricane Jr. and their 40-member band. And with an open bar, man, we should have sold tickets. Everyone was there. Every primo, compadre, in-law, vecino, jefito y jefita, tío and tía, nino and nina, nana and nono. And you don't know who's related to who. Because New Mexican family trees are more than trees. They are sprawling forests, thick bosques with branches and scandaled leaves like loose tongues. My family loved mitote, and tonight everyone came to laugh and to dance. The last time we all were alive. I was 13 and I hated weddings. Years of forced two-stepping with my auntie swinging me around like I was a mop. They danced across the kitchen floor to the rancheras on the Saturday morning radio. 89.1 KANW New Mexico music, the anthem of housework. I blame my mother for all the school dances. I stood wallflower while the vatos and the jocks grinded on the girls and left me wondering where I went wrong going right. But tonight, this music, this was my dance, and she was my girl. Morenita, red apple manzana smile. Her dress snug like the lace glove on the bride's hand. Then a choir of trumpets struck a tune old as the flowers. The old hurricane sang Flor de las Flores. The old timers took the floor like it was their wedding dance. And I took that girl's hand, showed her this is all I can do, but it's what I do. I danced her like I learned. Firm hand on the hip, our eyes locked. I led her with my stare, spun her like a parasol on my fingertips, dipped her so she arched like a guitar string, bent, slipped back, and held till she nearly broke. We kissed beneath the shadow of a Spanish song. And then Grandpa danced Grandma beside us. Slow stride, step and bass line. He leaned in, shouted over the music, "Hey, she's your cousin!" And danced off like it was a secret. But everybody heard, fingers young and old pointed, their laughing grins frozen in the photographer's lens. Gossip jumped the tables, the girl ran off and Grandpa cracked himself up. Sorry to lie to you like that, but that looked like it was going a little too far, a little too quick. But good for you, mijo! This moment breathes in an old family album found in a tomb of dust. A photograph of generations where the joyful ghosts laugh and dance like they will never die. And as I close the book, an old song comes to mind, and I whisper, all the dead desire most is to live in our memory. All they desire most is to laugh and to dance. Thanks. Right on. So I have a couple more poems for you all. Maybe one more short one. I get teased every once in a while at the poetry slams because I go up there with my phone and I try to read my poem off of my phone. It looks a little silly. Andrea Serrano's another poet, and she was making fun of me. She said, what was that? Oh, sí, high-tech Aztec. That was the worst reading I'd ever done. Because then somebody called me in the middle of the poem. It's like, oh no, what am I doing? All right, so I've got a couple more for you here. So I mentioned my grandfather in that last poem. I write a lot of poems about my family. I write a lot of poems about everything, but my favorite ones are the ones that I write about, my grandpa, my grandma, stories about my mom. Like those are always like my favorite poems to read because they were always so, I don't know, like they were very funny people. They were poets in their own right, but just in conversation, like sitting around the kitchen table, there's stuff that I heard, like some stories that I heard that, that is poetry, like just the regular everyday around the house stuff. And so I always like to write about that. And so this one I wrote 10 years ago after my grandfather had passed away. I went to the National Poetry Slam in St. Louis, and a poet from Texas read this poem about his grandfather, and my grandpa was back home sick in the hospital. And when I came back home, my grandpa waited, I think he held on a little bit longer so I could see him and say goodbye before he left. And then the next day I wrote this poem, and so I always love to perform this one because I wanted it to be like him. I wanted it to be funny, I wanted it to tell a story, and I wanted it to be from the heart. So this is called The Storyteller. My grandpa fought in the Mexican Revolution, rode with Emiliano Zapata, smoked a leño with Pancho Villa. He was a veteran of World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam. He taught FDR how to cuss in Spanish. My abuelo was a United Farm Worker, member of the labor union, the Chicano students movement. He marched on Washington twice, won a Congressional Medal of Honor and a Purple Heart, but lost them both to Fidel Castro in a poker match. He was a Mexican professional wrestler, known only to the world of luchadores as El Chingon, the great-grandson of Geronimo Apache Warrior. He played guitarrón with Johnny Cash, Marty Robbins, and Willie Nelson, worked construction on the Astrodome, and once in the late 70s, got into a bar fight with Hulk Hogan and totally kicked the bleach blonde living crap out of him. And all this before my grandpa was 21 years old. That's what he told me. Told me and the rest of his grandchildren as we sat, legs crossed, sitting on the floor around his recliner in the living room, the ancient Teron mud walls of Old Town. Grandma called him mentiroso, a liar with a mouth as vast as the mesa that hid the sun after dark. But he was no liar. He was a storyteller. As a child, I dreamt of his legends. Like one night before bed, I asked Grandpa to teach me stories rather than teach me prayers. And he said, "Ay, mijo, stories are prayers. They're songs sung to the ears that you will never see. They will hang in the ears of the young and split their tongues long after your breath becomes the sunset." Grandpa's words were his truth, testament to a beating world, flow beneath whatever memories the future would hold. And we sit on the floor and listen to the time that Grandpa walked to Old Town Plaza, shook President Clinton's hand, and told him a joke. And 3 years later, when he walked to the same plaza, shook President Bush's hand and called him pendejo, estúpido, baboso, and he swore that was a joke too. We listen of he and Grandma's first kiss, their hearts 2 stars in the desert night. I have always wanted to tell a story like him. He was the first poet I ever heard, the only father I've ever known, the storyteller. My grandpa was the word. And sometimes I wonder what stories of his own death he's told. Whether in his own words he was gunned down on the shores of Normandy, or in a Mexican border town by the itching hands of Dillinger, generations beyond the truth of the hospital bed in our living room where his recliner used to be. Truth in swollen bones, gust from withered lungs, what tales of heroics then? When our breathing ancestors become the soil that stains our flesh, that sunset in our skin, when we become their stories. My grandpa was a liar and soothsayer, a guitarist of burning words. He is the prayer, the song, and the story that will hang in my ears, split my tongue, and be sung with every memory in my breath. Thank you. All right, I got a brand new one just for you all. Wrote it especially for this event. So, my favorite food in the world, I think, out of everything is a tortilla. That's it. Nothing fancy. It's awesome. My buddy Joe used to tell me this awesome story about his grandfather, of how he was trying to impress somebody one day. They were talking about, there was a dinner party and they were having dinner with this really fine silverware, and it was, very expensive stuff. And the grandpa says, "Oh, this ain't nothing. I'm so rich. I eat with a different spoon for every bite I take." And then he pulled out a tortilla and he tore off a little piece, and then he got some chili. So yeah, the tortilla is where it's at. That's my favorite food in the world. So I've got this poem about tortillas, another one about my grandparents. So thank you all for having me. It was wonderful to perform here. Thank you once again to Shelly and everybody putting on FUZE. And also a public service announcement. If you liked my work, I do have CDs. I have a 24-track album that I put together, and it's spoken word and music. So if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. And thank you again for being awesome and coming up this morning. So here it goes. When I remember how I learned to make tortillas, I remember my grandparents. Mostly, I remember grocery shopping with my grandparents. It took all day. That Saturday morning after the Social Security check came in, we'd load up in the van and hit Razban Dairy, the Rainbow Bakery, the Albuquerque Tortilla Factory, the Chili Connection, General Mills Factory, Southwest Cash and Carry Restaurant Supply, then the Fruit Basket, and Hutchinson's Fruit Company. The last stop was Nelson's Meat Market. 10 hours later, the shopping was done. The next 2 hours spent stocking the pantry, the ice boxes, the old freezer. Grandpa would clear the kitchen table and the trasteros for the morning. The first thing Grandma would cook was tortillas. A 50-pound sack of blue bird flour poured out into la bandeja, a pound of manteca, a half can of Morton salt, half can of baking powder, water so hot it would burn your calluses off. Knead it until the masa doesn't stick. Roll the balls so they look like tiny turtles and let them sit. Cover them with the toallita until they're ready. Then Grandma broke out the bolillo and rolled the tortillas in 4 strikes. And Grandpa would roll them slow, perfect round every time. And my tortillas would come out looking like Texas. They'd stand at the stove for hours, fingerprints burned away on the comal, flipping tortillas like they were feeding the whole world, because to them, they were feeding the whole world. And the radio played Al Hurricane, and they danced while they cooked. We cooked all day, until every space in the kitchen was full of tortillas, and the whole house smelled like El Modelo. This is how my family survived. This is how my grandparents fed us all with no money. If you ever use the tortilla as a spoon to eat cereal, you know what I'm talking about. I often think about that kitchen of my childhood, all the mitote and the laughing and arguing, how the chili always turned out hotter when Grandma and Grandpa were fighting, where I learned the recipes of their mothers. And when I think of these memories, all I can think of is how bad I want to eat a tortilla. Thank you very much.